Hi, and welcome to episode 1 of Art, History, and Design. These videos won't be terribly academic in nature, more of a casual appreciation of art and its design themes. I hope that it's both approachable for casual observers as well as practitioners of art and design at various levels. So this first picture is from Alfred Sisley, and it is called Snow at Louveciennes, which I'm probably butchering the French pronunciation. When we look at this piece, we can see that there's a woman walking down a kind of street, rustic street covered with snow, carrying an umbrella or parasol, kind of perhaps walking at her leisure and enjoying the scenery, the gentle snowfall that we can perceive in kind of the gestural brush strokes, as well as the general coating of snow pretty much covering everything here. So apparently Sisley lived nearby somewhere in this village, and he painted this scene earlier in the year, or earlier in some spring or summer, in kind of a rainy setting. So he's familiar with this kind of view, this view particularly, actually. When I look at a painting, I like to consider points of interest, primary, secondary, and tertiary points of interest, and why I look at certain points of interest and how they guide throughout the frame. So why, for instance, would this woman be considered a primary point of interest? Well, there are various reasons. For instance, the complementary color contrast of the oranges and blue. You have the neighboring orange to the susceptible blue, as it is the smaller of the two, the blue being the smaller one as well. If we look at the linear motif that I've drawn earlier, we can see that this backdrop frames this woman in a kind of square, kind of hems her in and gives it a kind of point of departure, kind of a resting point, a landmark, if you will. So from there, we can look at the other elements of the linear motif, such as the horizontal gate. The horizontals are well represented in the roof, as well as diagonals, as well sloping in the roofs. And in the trees, vertical line play, but more organic here, rather than just the straight up angular organic lines of the fence. And these all make up the multifarious line and shape play of the linear motif to make it a dynamic image, since all of the diagonals, horizontals, and verticals are well represented, as well as the more organic kind of curvilinear lines that mark the trees in the distance, in affinity, in color and value affinity, or similarness or similarity in the sky. As well as if we consider the thirds, the rule of thirds, we find that the woman is on a vertical third and a horizontal third, further tying her together and denoting a point of interest. The thirds is just a dynamic artist's technique to divide up the frame and allows the eye to roam around from an asymmetrical vantage point. So there's a primary point of interest, and we can just kind of wander around from there. The gate here, I would think, would be a secondary point of interest, as it is blue, complementing the orange, and kind of a diagonal line of closure behind the woman. And from there we can just wander throughout in kind of an organic curvilinear line throughout the houses and into the distance, the placid blue sky. So if now looking at the next image, this one's by Claude Money, and it is called The Road to Louveciennes, Melting Snow at Sunset. So this is a fairly dramatic piece. It takes place at the sunset. And the author of the book that I noticed this painting from, Charles Moffat, the book called Impressionists in Winter, he notes on this painting that it is a fairly dramatic piece. There's a dramatic play of lighting and quite a bit of colorful in the direct lighting of the sky and the roadway, filled with intense oranges at the horizon, fairly coating and covering a placid blue sky. The road has a kind of marble quality to it, and we follow it into the distance towards the vanishing point at the sunset, which also creates some of the more striking color saturation with the bright orange of the sunset. Okay, fair enough. So when compared to Sisley, this painting has a richer usage of darks. We might notice that from the get-go. Going back to the Sisley, we see that the Sisley's more high-key. It's a little lighter, more diaphanous, and the color contrast and the linear motif does more of the contrast work. It's more of a contrast point in that one. Less dramatic interplays of lights and darks. However, with this one, we can see our lights and darks a little just more predominant. In the foreground, the little splotches between the snow and the trees, the ambient, occluded region of the trees, darkened, and just kind of throughout, generally the grays are a bit darker as well. There is also an interplay of complementary color contrast between the oranges and the blue in the sky, for instance, and some nice little neutral colors in the foliage of the trees, kind of a pale blue impression that I'm getting there, along with some peaches and just kind of these shrubs taking on some desaturated but noticeable reds as well. It's peach colors in the sidewalks and various things like that. In affinity with the sky. And as with Monet, he has kind of an atmospheric envelope to everything. It makes it rather interesting. It creates a lot of unity, but also with variety hither and thither about as well, to make it an interesting and more dynamic piece. So this one does have rustic charm. I think it's a quiet, solemn kind of piece at sunset. There are really no spectators here, which it's not that uncommon for Monet, really. He painted haystacks, I believe, with nobody there, but it's curious that there should just be nobody there here, as I'm sure when he painted it, there probably would have been people walking around. So it's true to life in a certain sense, but in another sense, it isn't. But at any rate, it's kind of subtly poetic, I think. And yeah, it's quite an impressive piece overall, I think. So if now moving to the last one, we have this piece by Pissarro, which also painted with Monet, but this one's in Pontois, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which I doubt that I am. From the Impressionist book that I also found this piece in, Pissarro is quoted as saying, "There's nothing more cold than the sun at its height in summer. Contrary to what the colorists believe, nature is colored in winter and cold in the summer." It was in 1873, rather. So from that, we can take and garner that Pissarro seemed to prefer the colors of winter. Perhaps he thought that the sun was more overpowering in the summer. I'm not exactly sure. But of course he has some really nice pieces, rather interesting pieces all throughout the year, I think. But in this painting, taking a look at it, it's similar to the others in that it's again a snow-covered road, snow-covered country road, and we have another woman or someone walking down it. But there's some other people here now at the end of the road. Perhaps they know this person, perhaps they don't. There is kind of perhaps a tension between them. Maybe I'm just sensing that based on nothing, but actually We don't really know much about what's going on between them at all. But I think that's the primary point of interest, and from there the eye wanders perhaps to these people ahead of her on the path, another human reference point, perhaps the building to the left here. It's close by to this person. We have these terracotta, kind of desaturated yellows and earth tones with some interesting colors in the windows. The shutters, the green shutters, fairly saturated, contrasting to the warmer reds and peach tones there. Some color contrasts. And that's really the only place that we find it, so that's warranted enough to draw the eye in that direction. As well, if we turn this on, which I sketched earlier, we can see some more of the linear motif. Again, we have diagonal lines of closure in the walkway, leading us again to the horizon. As well, we have some organic splays of snow, emphasizing those curvilinear lines as it heads into the foreground. And he's doing a lot with this line and shape in the linear motif. I think less with value. He does kind of gather some of the values here in the foreground, and he does some things with the color contrast to denote various points of interest here. And so that's it. That's it for these three paintings. I thought they would be interesting as it is winter in the States. And it did snow today, so I thought that would be kind of an appropriate way to kick off this series of videos that I intend to do. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.